Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Why We Need Horror. Where we're going to talk about why we need horror in the darkest times, and we are both sorry that this is happening. I would like to welcome Alma Katsu, author of the upcoming Fiend, coming out from J.P. Putnam and Sons. And I'm Becky Spratford, as you know me, the horror review columnist for Library Journal and other things, but also here as the author of Why I Love Horror, which is coming out from Saga and features Alma. So we're going to talk about both. I want to start because we have the very good luck that on Monday, my review of Fiend was due to be turned into Library Journal. So I am going to read you out loud the draft review, which Alma has have yet to heard. And that's how we're going to introduce the book and start talking about her book. Okay, so Fiend by Alma Katsu. The uber-wealthy Berisha family has ruled the import-export industry for 1,000 years. Over that millennium, anytime someone tried to cross them, death and destruction came decisively and swiftly. Readers encounter the Berisha family in 21st century New York City through the eyes of the current patriarch Zeph's 3 children. So Darden is the oldest and only son, a reluctant heir. Maris, the middle child, who wants nothing more than to usurp Darden. And Nora, the youngest, who wants the family to use their power to put good into the world. Leave that at that. Alternating between the 3 in timelines set now and during their childhood then, readers are able to get a full picture of each sibling while also watching them come to terms with the demon that both controls and blesses their family. All the more horrific for its realism, Katsu's first contemporary horror novel, is oozing with dread as it accurately captures the evil required to obtain and retain exorbitant wealth at a moment in history when billionaires are destroying the world with their greed. The idea of an assist from an ancient demon feels chillingly possible. So I want to let you know that this is really great for people who like Succession, obviously, but don't sleep on books like A Better World by Sarah Langan. So that is Fiend. Alma, welcome. Let's talk about this book and, writing it and how it's a big shift from your other horror novels.
Sure. Well, first, though, let me say thank you, Becky, for having me. This is a real honor. I can't wait to talk about why I love horror. And also, though, I wanted to thank all the librarians out there. I know I speak for a lot of authors. We know you guys are the first responders right now, that you're catching a lot of flack out there from the public. And we really appreciate that you are standing up for the readers and for the writers. Okay, Fiend. It was a really interesting thing. I've written 3 historical horror novels and I love them, but the idea for Fiend kind of came to me whole, just boom, which rarely happens. And partly because Succession had just ended and I loved Succession, it was so well written, but it made me think a lot. So we're going to talk a little bit about my background, life and intelligence. But part of that is, I had the chance to observe very powerful, wealthy people up close. I will say right here, foreigners, foreigners who were approved targets of the US intelligence system, okay? But, I would maybe listen in on calls where this autocratic, dictator was saying terrible things about people, right? Of course, you'd think you'd expect that. This is somebody who slaughters thousands and thousands of people. But to listen to them interact with their family members and just the way they look down on people, that stays with you. And it just struck me how so many people don't seem to really see the badness in people who are very selfish and privileged. And I thought, well, maybe I can make that feel a little bit more resonant. The other thing is, and I think this is true of a lot of horror, it just really helps people see the evil, right? For some reason, some people won't see it, as it is. But if you give them a way in, something that's familiar, whether it's a horror trope like a vampire or a werewolf, something like that, or in this case, something that's a little bit more, not defined,
Yeah.
they can see the horror, they can recognize it better.
Well, also, they're coming in with like a story we know, right? Rich billionaire families that become the members of the families are social media stars because of how rich they are. And, also there's some scenes that are sort of like very Godfather-esque too, right? Because Zeph is the leader of this family. There are all these ways to get in, but the fact that there is an evil behind there, as I said, it seems possible that there's something more than just their human evil, because they are evil. And we know that like their company does bad things, because how do you get this rich, right?
Well, that's the funny thing that a lot of people, or some people at least, don't seem to recognize, the companies that are, they whitewash themselves. That's the other thing. I mean, there's a lot of reputation management that goes on out there of, the Sacklers were a big inspiration for this book, for instance. There's a lot of people who don't seem to want to believe that they could have done the evil that they did, affect the lives of millions of people, cause millions of deaths because their name's on a museum or something. Well, that's how they rehabilitate their reputations. What kind of person can do that? It's just mind-boggling. So yeah, with this story, I was trying to make that point come home for people, especially if they, I often say that horror is the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down, right? So hopefully it's an entertaining story, but there is a lesson behind it too.
I will say you work very hard for those three narrators. They are clearly complicit in the family, but they also, you have sympathy for them. They are, even when they're doing terrible things or thinking about doing terrible things or being complicit, they are fully fleshed out characters with relationships and with each other, especially these siblings. And I appreciated that as well. It also made me more uncomfortable reading it, right? I don't like them. I don't want them to have anything good happen to them, but yet I kind of understand them.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the conundrum, and again, maybe it was from, monitoring all those horrible people, but no one thinks of themselves as a villain. Everyone thinks they justify their actions. And so I wanted to show in this book how that happens, how you go down from the slippery slope. We're born good people, but circumstances sometimes warp us. And it's important that we know that so that we can recognize when we're being warped.
And I'm going to switch up a little of our planned order. And I want you to talk about your experience, because you brought up like people who don't think they really like horror. And we even have a question about it, about why that it's lasted so long. And you have an amazing example from literally just the other night. And I want to talk about that.
Sure. It was last night. Last night, I was invited to speak to a book club. And the interesting thing is, the woman who invited me is the wife of a former colleague of mine. And while they're very happy for my success, I think they're incredibly confused that I ended up writing horror stories. So the first thing I asked this group, who were all like me, right? Women in their 60s or above, most of them retired. But my experience with book clubs is a lot of them don't read genre, and they certainly don't read horror genre. So I asked them, I said, would you have ever read this book for yourself or for the club on your own? And they all said no, that but they were gobsmacked. They loved the book. They loved that it opened their eyes to things that had happened, the truth of what had happened back in World War II. The book they read was The Fervor, which is a book I wrote about the Japanese internment. And they, like I said, they were absolutely gobsmacked. Well, you could not have a more, relevant book. The Japanese internment was about a president who used an executive order to send 120,000 people to prisons in the matter of weeks. 70,000 of those people were US citizens. Not one of them had charges brought against them. If you open the newspaper, you will see this is what's happening today, or the threat of it barreling down on us like a train, right? People who write horror today are trying to deal with actual fears in their lives. This was a fear for me, and this is a fear for a lot of different ethnicities, right? That somehow everything we work so hard to attain can be taken away from us in an instant. And you try to, you know, show that to people so they'll who are not from that group, so they'll have empathy, but they'll be aware. You want to believe it's never going to happen again. I mean, I think I wrote that book in 2020, 2021, came out in 2022. I
Yeah,
forget exactly.
2022 was when you and I talked about it at PLA with people. Yeah.
Yes. And here it is 3 years later, and it is absolutely relevant. That's what I love about horror.
I mean, love, scared. And, it's funny because the question we had that kind of goes with this is why do we believe it's lasted so long? Horror. And it's because unfortunately, we have horror, which leads us into my book, Why I Love Horror, because that's the entire thing that my book was about. So very quickly, those of you who follow my blog know that I have invite authors every year to write why I love horror for the blog. But in this case, I invited 18 authors who are writing horror today. Not Stephen King, like the people that came after. We like to say that this book begins literally and stands on the foundation of Brian Keene as our author of, the foundation. And Alma was invited to write for this book for many reasons, but the most is because of her real life experience with human horror. So everybody in the book was allowed to asked to write an essay, very broad strokes. Give me something in 4,000 words or less that answers the question why I love horror. And unfortunately, Alma's answer is very relevant. I want to just let everyone know she turned this in before the election. Everything was due in September. And when we were going through edits, I did encourage her to make it a little more political and a little more strong. I'm not even sure if it's strong enough because, as you just said, we're living through this again. But I would like you to read an excerpt that we picked out from your essay for everyone so they can get a sense of the real world horror you're talking about.
Sure. Too many people regard horror as a juvenile indulgence, right up there with comic books, another short-sighted mistake. They regard it at best as mindless fun and at worst as indulgence in dark and period interests. I assure you, horror is not silliness. Horror is serious business. I might have a chip on my shoulder on this point, though, more so than most people, because I spent my working life in intelligence as an analyst at a few three-lettered government agencies. This was in the 1990s when the world was boiling over, with civil unrest that often resulted in genocides and mass atrocities. Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Somalia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, you name it, I was off in the wings documenting mass slaughter and counting bodies. I won't go into detail, but yes, the job was every bit as difficult and depressing as you might imagine. When most people hear the word genocide, they think of the Holocaust and the Nazi killing machine. The thing you must know about genocide is the simple physics of it. It's impossible to eliminate a lot of people at one time without the participation of the citizenry. That's right. Genocides are mostly neighbor on neighbor violence, often with militias providing the muscle. Consider this your wake-up call. We're afraid of the wrong things. We are the monsters.
And I mean, I want to talk about this for a little while. And then we're going to move on to like other, because you've read the book, other essays in the book as well. But you really spend your essay talking about the things you've seen in the world that are horror. And you talked about it a little with the book club, but why do we need horror? And why specifically do we need it? Because there's a lot of really young people in this book. Why do we need it from our younger voices as well?
Yeah, these are all such interesting questions, and I think would make for really good group discussions. Maybe if librarians found that there was interest in this, and especially maybe bringing in those young authors. So a couple things. One is for me, I feel conflicted in a way because I do know there's so much terrible things that go on in the world. I almost find it laughable. Why do we need a horror story? Why can't we just go right to the truth? Well, most people won't engage. I mean, not just with terrible things, with a lot of things in the world. They won't engage with them directly. It has to go through this sort of filter that makes it easier or more acceptable for them to look at something that's uncomfortable, right? That scares them or makes them uncomfortable. But I do worry a lot. I talk to a lot of folks, and there's a certain demographic that just says, I refuse to, read a horror novel. I refuse to watch a horror show. It's just too scary or whatever. Those people are the first ones who are going to be picked off, right? When the bleep hits the fan.
It's interesting because that's Josh Mallerman's essay in the book. He has a story where he's telling somebody who's a snob, he has a interaction on a train, why they need to read horror. Almost the same thing. Yeah.
It's true. It's true. You cannot stick your head in the sand and think that these things don't exist because they do. And while you're sitting there with your head in the sand, they're circling around you. Okay. I mean, I remember when I was in grad school and I was working at the time, and I'd listen to these people they were just so disconnected with the fact that there are people who would be happy to kill you, right? And in really horrible ways. And it's not a fantasy, it is a reality. Okay, I don't want to make people like too scared, but
But
the
it's
reality
important to
for
say this. Like, this is people are going to be coming to the library to see things, and books like yours, which are scary. And like your book club said, there wasn't all this blood and gore. I didn't know horror wasn't that way. Like, these are terrifying stories, even without the blood and gore, you know?
right. People have a lot of fears right now in their lives. There's a lot of confusion out there. There's a lot of uncertainty. And, we're not all the same. You brought up the point of the terror of marginalization. Um, it's really important, I think, for us to investigate each other's fears so that we really understand what's out there, what we're dealing with. I find it really interesting how many young people are coming into horror, not only as readers, but there's a lot of them. I I'm going to be in a couple events this year. The events are getting bigger and bigger, and it's, mostly young people, but also as writers, and they bring the most amazing stories with them that really make us all much more empathetic people. I mean, again, that is a great gift.
I know that you
With
and I have an
horror.
appearance together in September with Rachel Harrison in Nashville at Parnassus, and talk about a younger writer who is just capturing the fear of being a millennial,
Yeah.
in the world. And her essay in the book is, I mean, I'm not going to give it away, but it all predicates on low fat yogurt and what those commercials did for her growing up as a young woman, right? How much about your body is just commodified and horror, and yet she still resisted writing horror for many years. And here we're getting that voice from one of our best young voices. I mean, a best-selling author. All of her books are hugely popular, and there's a reason, right? They strike a chord. And you noting to me, we're talking about the state of horror today, but there are so many writers. You even said younger than me. I loved how you put that when we were talking about this. Younger than me, who are writing. And we just wanted to talk about that a little bit. I had posited that part of it is, I think, a lot of the people who are your generation and between your and my generation are teaching. So we have people like Stephen, these are people in the book, but Stephen Graham Jones, Victor Laval, Mary San Giovanni, Gabino Iglesias, they're all in this book talking about their connection to writing horror. And I will note, Victor Laval's is extremely moving about how he resisted horror for so long. And to
Really.
be somebody who's won awards for it is fascinating. But, they talk about this, but they teach horror, right? At prestigious universities where they are, the writing programs. And you hear this all the time from people, especially Mary San Giovanni talks about this a lot when she speaks. Nobody was teaching me to write horror. They told me I shouldn't write horror. Victor
Right.
talks about it in his essay. Rachel even talks about it a little bit in her essay. Like, I didn't know I could do this, but now some of those people are there teaching others. I think that's one reason why they're there, but I know you have some other ideas as well.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I was just contacted yesterday by a teacher at a all-girls school in New York City who was teaching a class this semester on women in horror. And he asked if I would speak to the class. And I was gobsmacked. Who would think that a girls' Catholic school, would be wanting me? They practically drove me out because, I was reading such suspect things when I was young and I was in Catholic school. So the world is really changing for people who are, people want to know about this. And it's just as valid, this genre work is just as valid as other things. It's so reflective of, again, what people are afraid of these days. I taught at Clarion a couple years ago, and that's pretty renowned for science fiction and fantasy. Every single one of them wrote a horror story. I mean, horror is really where people's minds are at right now. It helps you cope with, you know, the uncertainty and your own fears. But what I really like is it makes you so empathetic to what other people are going through.
And these unprecedented times have not been fun living through them. And I feel like you add in, you brought this up before, we've talked about this, a lot of the authors in this book don't just use their age and this dealing with the world, but their marginalization as well as a way to, and I know you did that in the Fervor and talked about that a lot, especially in your very moving author's note at the end of the Fervor. So it makes horror, unfortunately, fresher because they can take the same tropes that we are used to and they can apply this terror of living every day as a marginalized human into it.
And they do it so well. So one thing I'll say, um, like last night we were talking about the Fervor, and there's other books that are about the Holocaust, fictional books that are about the Holocaust. Not too many of them are written by Asians. And while the stories are great, they don't really take you in deep into the fears and the concerns of those people in the camp. My husband's entire family were interned. My mom is Japanese and she came over after the war and she went through hell in a handbasket. But so the people who are from communities that are affected, people who are affected, can really tell such important moving stories. So the next thing I said to these ladies was, okay, well, if you like that, you've got to read The Reformatory by Tananarive
Who's
Due.
also in Why I Love Horror as well.
And her whole family has been involved in the civil rights movement for so long, but I think it was her uncle, had been in one of these reformatories for troublesome boys who just happened to be of color. And Stephen Graham Jones, the Buffalo Hunter. These people take you, yeah, take you into the reality of what it is like to be in that group and to see the fears that they have to deal with every day. I have to say, I'm probably making one mistake. Now, some of the biggest horror novels of the last few years have been historicals, and here I am doing a U-turn into contemporaries.
But you are really, I mean, you, like you said, you felt this story come to you whole. And I think it does combine the work you've been doing with your thrillers as well and your horror. I really feel like this, you're going to be bringing your readers together because those have been extremely popular and critically acclaimed as well. The thriller, spy novels. I think this brings together the sensibilities in a way that speaks to this moment really, really well.
And I thank you very much for saying that. And I think that's all what any writer wants is they want to speak to the moment. They want to help people, whether it's entertaining them to get to it, but usually they see what's going on around them and they want to use art to lend their voice, to show their perspective. And that's what horror writers are doing. And thank you so much for putting this book together because I do think we've got to change some minds. We've got to make people understand there's stories out there that are going to help folks, and they just don't know it yet.
And I know a couple people were upset that it wasn't ready for download in the exhibit hall yet, but we're going to blame Paul Tremblay for that. His daughter did some beautiful drawings to go with his essay, and they don't want it out there until those are fixed up. But no, seriously, the list of everybody that's in it is going to be in the booth. It's on the Saga website, and there will be, if you're going to StokerCon Librarians Day, there will be physical copies, and if you're going to ALA in Philadelphia, there will be physical copies at the booth and at the Library Reads panel where I'll be talking about the book.
Wow, I love how much support Saga's giving you. I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
it's really wonderful to see. Yeah, and they're the best press for horror right now, I gotta say.
It's been a lot of fun. I love that they allowed me to use authors who weren't Saga, which was great. But I want to get to a question from Matthew, who actually I know really well and loves horror. And I'm going to start by answering it after I read it, but you can answer as well. A panelist in the last sessions mentioned how horror isn't as big in the UK as it is in the US. I actually watched that panel as well, Matthew. Do you think horror is more of a US phenomenon? And I would disagree because all of these authors, and pretty much all of them in the book, I don't know about you, but a lot of them have deals with Titan for their British, I think you do too, and they sell like hotcakes. And in fact, we have a British author in the book, Nunzo Ono, who's also an award-winning author, who's British. I don't see that. And I think if you listen to the Talking Scared podcast with Neil McRobert, you will see that. But what do you think about that, Alma?
I haven't really considered it because I know the presses are fairly active, like you said, Titan, but some of the other ones as well. I'm trying to think who used to, some of my stuff is published by another publisher. But, just in general, markets are smaller in the UK, so that might have something to do with it. But they do, at least the publishers seem to have a great appetite for it. I have to say, because we don't really get to see our foreign sales numbers, not like we do in the US. So I don't have a very good sense of how well I've sold there. But it seems like there's been a great appetite for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I heard that it was a British author say that. I thought maybe she just wasn't as plugged in. From what I hear and from people who live there, I mean, Catriona Ward, who is not in the book, but gave me a wonderful quote. She declined to be in it for her own personal reasons, but she's a big supporter of it. Everybody over there really likes it a lot. I want to, as we have a few minutes to wrap up here, I want to let everyone know there is time for another question if you put one in. But Alma, I want to talk about what's going on with you and your other books. I do want to start by saying I know that okay, let's go back. I was there next to you when you won the Stoker Award for your novella, which I think is going to be made into something else. And that was one of my most fun moments because you truly, truly did not think you were going to win the Stoker Award. And I was sitting next to you.
Oh, so this is for Werewolf,
Yes.
which is the werewolf, which is it's almost a fairy tale. It's like a cautionary tale. It's set in Germany in the waning days of World War II. The Allies are about to come over the border. The Germans are scared out of their mind. They've been sort of pumped full of propaganda, that the Americans are going to eat their babies and that kind of stuff. And in this fairy tale like village, this man who was sort of a pacifist um gets convinced to join the local militia, the militia I warned you about in my uh little excerpt there. So at the time, yeah, it looked like there was actually German television interest, but that's sort of rolled off. I'm very lucky in that some of the other stories, all my spy stories end up getting picked up. So Black Vault, which I call Slow Horses meets the X-Files,
That's
was picked
good.
up
I
by
like that.
AMC and it's plugging right along. So hopefully we'll have some good news there soon. Fiend was actually optioned like right out of the gate. I was gobsmacked because if you know Hollywood right now, it's really hard to sell anything. But there was a surprising amount of interest in Fiend. So yeah, very lucky there.
That's great. What about books? I know you have one coming out in August, but this one, Fiend.
Right.
But do you know
Well,
what you're going to be doing next? Are you going to go do more spy thrillers? Are you going to do more horror? Do you know?
Well, it's kind of a funny story because there were changes at Putnam and I lost my long-term editor. I'm hoping to do another spy story and we'll probably be shopping that around fairly soon. I can't really talk about what's going on there. But so there's that and a couple ideas for the next horror story.
Oh, good.
I finished the first draft for the next horror novel, which kind of deals with my other life, which is technology. I was a technologist and a tech futurist for the government for a long time. And so I get to dabble with high tech and kind of show the horror from that. And believe me, there's a lot of horror there. So
I'm glad to know there's a horror novel in the bank, at least getting like you've got one in there in draft because we love the spy thrillers, but we also, I mean, here we love the horror. I just want to thank everybody because we are out of time. This was lovely. Thank you for all your chats and your questions. I do see another question came in real quick. We're gonna have to, I'll answer that at another time for someone, but I want to thank Alma Katsu, author of Fiend, coming out from G.P. Putnam's Sons in August, right? Is that right?
oh, September.
Oh, September. You're the same month as me, September. And then Why I Love Horror by Saga, Simon & Schuster, is coming out in September as well. And I thank you all for coming. And please, please promote horror to your readers. Coming up next, we have 3 concurrent panels called Crime Time, Worlds Beyond, and Mixing It Up. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.